Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It's time to once again have a look at War Thunder and also War Thunder Mobile, since they seem to be being developed in tandem at the moment. When it comes to the files, we have a data mine from Zabby, which was pointed out by Mother Hen on the Discord, so thank you for that information. By the way, if you have anything that you'd like to see talked about or videos on, make sure just to ping me on the Discord and show me some information which you might want to have a look at, because, you know, I'm always going to see what's going on. But Mother Hen posted the fact that they've added a bunch of localizations for names of new ships for War Thunder Mobile. And as we've talked about previously, War Thunder Mobile runs alongside War Thunder, meaning the stuff that they're working on there will eventually come to War Thunder 2. There's no reason to try and kind of hide it, which means that it is interesting to see these products kind of develop together. It's kind of like with Enlisted, where you got terrain deformation and napalm, and then in War Thunder you had it alongside of it. So this is more of a look into what is coming in the future for War Thunder and, of course, its contemporaries. One of the other things to remember is they did add a bunch of controls for carriers recently for Naval, especially on the recent dev server, so this stuff might be coming a little bit quicker than thought. There's a ton of carriers which have been added to the files and a few destroyers. Some of them we've already seen before though, such as the Lexington, I believe, which is already in the game, and also the Illustrious carriers. So I'm going to leave them off and we're going to have a look at the rest. One of the leaks about a month or two ago said that there was going to be a bunch of guided missile destroyers getting added to the game, and one of them seems to have appeared, the Hamburg of the Hamburg class. This is a German destroyer which was built and launched in the 60s, and the variant that we're looking at is the 1977 variant. Basically, this is the Exocet missile version of it. It had a twin Exocet launcher on it. It also had a bunch of anti-submarine rocket launchers on it, and also 300mm guns on top of that as well. So this one would definitely rely heavily on its missiles, and also was the lead ship of the Hamburg class of destroyers, since it is of course named after it. This vehicle served from the 60s into the 90s, where it was eventually scrapped because it wasn't too useful. But the fact is, it served for 30 years, and during that time went on, I'm sure, a bunch of different missions where it was used, and it would be another foray into this more modern destroyer idea which has been talked about. Another vehicle that has been added is the USS Selfridge. Now this one is kind of surprising because it's just a standard Porter-class destroyer. This vehicle was built and commissioned in the 30s and obviously served during the Second World War with all of the other Porter classes. It was scrapped in 1946 and did have a pretty significant refit in 1944. So I'm wondering if that's going to be the version that we see, because if we just get the standard version, which is obviously before 1944, it's just pretty much the same as the Porter, which we already have in the game. It has the 5-inch guns, it has the Chicago typewriter, it also has the torpedo tubes. The actual refit, though, that it had in 1944 did give it access to more AA armament, but took away a bunch of the main guns. It only had 5 5-inch guns, so 2 dual sets and a single one, plus 4 Bofors 40mm, 8 Oerlikons, and also a few depth charges on top of it, changing its use from, instead of just a gun destroyer, to kind of a multi-role vehicle at the end of the day. The USS Essex is one of those new carriers which have been added to the files, alongside some of the other ones. You know, we talked about the good old Illustrious, and also even a Shokaku we already have in the game, just not the one which is actually sat there. So the USS Essex is obviously part of the Essex class, once again named after it. This was a carrier which was used all the way from the Second World War all into even the 1970s, where it was scrapped. The vehicle itself went through many different iterations, mainly the stuff that it carried. It was mostly used to carry Wildcats, Dauntlesses, and Avengers during the Second World War. And also, the more interesting thing about this vehicle is it was actually hit by a kamikaze attack in 1944 off the Philippines and was able to survive, which is, pretty interesting. The vehicle itself can also defend itself quite impressively. Before the war, there was a lot of carriers which didn't really have a ton of armament on them, but this carrier has 12 5-inch guns, the similar ones you'll see on stuff like the Porter class. It also had 32 40mm AA guns and also 46 20mm AA guns. So not just waiting for the planes to save it, instead it was one of those which was able to save itself. A vehicle used through many decades and for many different services. It was one of those which was decommissioned and recommissioned a few times depending on what was going on during the period. So you could easily get a bunch of different variants or different things or different variants of this vehicle, or just the Essex class in general to be used. The next vehicle is the aircraft carrier, the Kaga, which has a really interesting story, I think is probably the way to put it. It's technically part of the Kaga class, but it's also kind of a refit of a bunch of different things. So this vehicle was originally supposed to be one of two of the Tosa-class battleships, but it was converted into a carrier because of the Washington Naval Treaty to replace a battlecruiser which was destroyed not by enemy combatants, but by the Earth. The Great Kanto earthquake irreparably damaged the Amagi battlecruiser, and the Japanese decided to build the Kaga in order to replace it. And then also at the same time, even though this thing was built in the 20s, it was refit in the 30s and used during the Second World War. It was also sunk at the Battle of Midway by dive bombers. So this is one of those which was lost during that conflict. So the vehicle had 10 single 200mm guns on it. It also had twin 127s and also some twin 25mm too, and can carry a bunch of different vehicles on it, including, of course, the Zero, the D3As, and the B5Ns. This vehicle, as it stands, would be interesting to see in War Thunder alongside all of the other ones. And to see all of these different carriers being added must only lead to one thing, which is their expansion in War Thunder. The next carrier is the USS Midway, which didn't actually make it into the Second World War. It was commissioned into service 8 days after the Second World War, but it did serve for about 50 years, basically leaving service in 1992. It's also a museum ship. You can actually find the USS Midway in San Diego in California if you want to head over there, which is quite cool. And the vehicle itself is very much learning a lot of, I suppose, lessons from the Second World War. It was also used in Operation Desert Storm. It was also used in the Vietnam War. It was used in many other areas as it went around. And I doubt it's going to go anywhere anytime soon, of course, being a museum ship. This vehicle did not sit down when it came to its armament. It had 18 5-inch guns, the Mark 16 variants. It also had 84 40mm Bofors guns and also 56 20mm. They absolutely went ham when it came to the guns on this thing. But since it lived in service for a long time, what ended up happening is they did actually remove a lot of the guns and replace them with missiles. The good old Phalanx CRWS came in to, have the gun setup, but also the Sea Sparrow launchers, 8 cells of them, basically 16 overall, just to keep this thing going. The vehicle itself also could carry a ton of aircraft, of course being an aircraft carrier, and with its service kind of showed how useful it was to the Americans. So even though it didn't serve in the Second World War, it served in many other conflicts and served very well. There's even a British carrier, which is kind of cool, the HMS Implacable. Now, this is another vehicle which I feel like over the years I'm just going to get wrong when it comes to its name. There's a ship that I'm dreading from the British forces, which is, of course, the Indefatigable class, which is just so hard for me to say, but Implacable is also a tough one. This vehicle was another mid-Second World War carrier, which was commissioned into service by the British, basically commissioned in 1944, but only served for 10 years. So this vehicle wasn't as crazy as stuff like the Midway and many others. The vehicle had 8 twin 4.5-inch guns on it. It also had a bunch of 2-pounder anti-aircraft guns and also 20mm to keep it going. The vehicle also itself could carry 80 aircraft and was a pretty crazy vehicle. It was used in the Norwegian campaign in 44 and even the Japanese campaign in 45, surprisingly, so was able to tour the World War area, even though it wasn't around for the longest time. It is kind of cool to see. It used Seafires during the Second World War and also Avengers, which I think is pretty cool. In Norway, it was even had on its decks some Fireflies which were used, meaning that pretty much all the vehicles we already have in the game could be used on these things. It is really interesting to think how these things are actually going to be added and go around the place. Also, sea vampires were even used on this in a post-war period, which I think is pretty cool. So as you can see, they're really expanding upon a lot of the naval side of stuff in War Thunder and also War Thunder Mobile, which should not be forgotten about since this is where most of these changes are happening. There is also being added to War Thunder Mobile stuff like the Lexington, stuff like, of course, the other vehicles which are around, the Shokaku class, the Zuikaku, which technically we have in the game, I believe, in the standard War Thunder. We have a Shokaku, maybe we don't have the actual, the Zuikaku itself, so maybe we'll have a look into that. But the fact is, this stuff is coming. You know, there's a bunch of these things being added to the files, being tested, being looked at, and it would be incredibly surprising if they never bring to the light of day. After they made the modernized carriers in the game, whether it was the modern ones or the World War II ones, when they updated them to a standard, you knew for a fact that these things were going to be used in their different ways. They are literally built like playable models. They are just not playable at the moment. And with more and more of these being added, more and more of these moving around, you know for a fact they're going to turn in pretty soon. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Brendan Quinn, Vilneus, Character Fuel, Juan the Panda, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Merciless Reaper, Orange Tail, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Moxie, B. Young, Bareen, Peter Grayling, Alan Hacker, Sem Alslan, Uncle Bean, and Derek R., and also Lafouche for supporting the channel.